Sometimes you think you know someone until they show you exactly who they are under pressure. I learned that lesson the hard way, and looking back, maybe I should have handled things differently. But when you're 6 months pregnant and your whole world is falling apart, you don't exactly think straight. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy hearing about real relationship drama. And don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. So there I was, 29 years old, 6 months pregnant, standing in what used to be our apartment, watching Sean throw his clothes into a bag like I was some kind of disease he needed to escape from. The side of my head was still throbbing where that stupid ceramic vase had clipped him. And yeah, I threw it. Sue me. When you're carrying someone's child and they're treating you like you're the problem, sometimes things get heated. Sean was 32, worked some corporate job that kept him busy enough to ignore me most days. We'd been together for over a year, and I'd moved into his place 4 months ago when we found out about the baby. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. He'd gotten distant cold, always questioning where I was or what I was doing. The man had trust issues that ran deeper than the Grand Canyon, and I was getting tired of walking on eggshells around his insecurities. That night started like any other fight. I came home from work a little late. Nash and I had grabbed drinks after a particularly brutal day, nothing serious, just two coworkers decompressing. But Sean immediately went into interrogation mode. Where were you? Why didn't you answer your phone? Who were you? With the usual paranoid boyfriend routine that made me want to scream. I tried explaining about Nash, how we worked together, how it was innocent, but Sean's face got that pinched look it always got when he thought I was lying. That's when I snapped. The vase was right there on the side table, and before I knew it, I'd hurled it at his thick skull. It barely grazed him, but you'd think I tried to murder him the way he reacted. That's it, he said, heading straight for the bedroom. I'm done with this crazy behavior. Crazy behavior. I was pregnant with his child, dealing with hormones and stress, while he acted like some kind of warden. So, yeah, I said some things. I told him the truth, that maybe the baby wasn't even his, that I'd been seeing Nash since March, that he could take his controlling attitude and shove it. I wanted him to hurt the way he was hurting me with all his accusations and suspicion. But instead of fighting for us, instead of recognizing that I was lashing out because I felt cornered and alone, Sean just kept packing. When I tried to explain that I was just upset that I didn't mean what I said about the baby, he wouldn't even look at me. You threw a vase at my head, then told me the baby isn't mine, he said, zipping up his bag. That's not hormones talking, that's the truth coming out. I begged him not to leave. I was 6 months pregnant, for crying out loud. What kind of man abandons a pregnant woman over one fight? But Sean walked right past me like I was nothing, called me names, said I gave him lies and someone else's kid. The cruelty in his voice still makes my skin crawl. He went to stay with his friend Travis, blocked my number, and acted like our entire relationship meant nothing. A year and a half together, a baby on the way, and he just threw it all away because he couldn't handle a woman with some fire in her. The next week, I decided to fight for our relationship. If Sean thought he could just abandon his pregnant girlfriend, he had another thing coming. I showed up at his office building. Figured if he wouldn't take my calls, maybe seeing me in person would snap him back to reality. Big mistake. Security treated me like some kind of stalker instead of a woman trying to save her family. Sean came down to the lobby, looking at me like I was a stranger, telling security I was his ex and that he wanted me removed from the building. Ex? We'd had one fight and suddenly I was his ex. How can you be so cruel? I asked him, tears streaming down my face. I made one mistake and you're throwing away our family. But Sean just stood there, emotionless as ever, while security escorted me out. The humiliation burned worse than anything. Here I was, visibly pregnant, being dragged away like some kind of criminal, while the father of my child watched without a trace of sympathy. I called his mother next. Surely she'd talk sense into her son about abandoning a pregnant woman, but even she seemed to buy into Sean's version of events. When I explained that I'd only lied about the baby's paternity to hurt him during our fight, she asked to see some text messages on my phone. I showed her the notification from Nash that had popped up a month ago, just him saying he couldn't wait to see me that night with a heart emoji. Work friends send heart emojis all the time, but she looked at me like I'd confirmed Sean's worst suspicions. "You need to figure out your priorities," she told me before hanging up. My own family was more supportive. My sister Casey and my mother Jeremy rallied around me, helping me see that Sean was being unreasonable. We decided I needed to take legal action. If he thought he could just walk away from his responsibilities, he'd learn otherwise in court. I hired a lawyer and filed for emergency financial support. Sean had cut me off completely, leaving me to handle all the pregnancy expenses alone. The man who'd promised to take care of me and our baby was nowhere to be found when I actually needed him. But Sean showed up to court with some hotshot attorney who made me look like the unstable one. They had photos of the tiny scratch on Sean's ear from the Vaz recordings of me trying to reach him at work testimony about my erratic behavior. Meanwhile, I was just a pregnant woman trying to get support from the father of my child. The judge denied my request, saying we needed to wait for paternity testing after the baby was born. I couldn't believe it. The system was protecting a man who'd abandoned his pregnant girlfriend over a woman who'd made one mistake in a moment of emotional distress. After the hearing, I had what Casey called a completely understandable breakdown. The stress of everything, the pregnancy, the abandonment, the legal battle, it was too much. But instead of seeing my pain, everyone acted like I was being dramatic. That's when things got really nasty. Someone slashed all 4 tires on my car while I was at work. $800 in damage, and I knew exactly who was behind it. When I filed a police report, they basically shrugged and said there was no proof. Convenient how the system protected Sean at every turn. The harassment got worse from there. Sean's friends started avoiding me. Mutual acquaintances stopped responding to my messages. It was like he'd poisoned everyone against me with his lies about what happened between us. I went into labor 3 weeks early. The stress of Sean's abandonment had literally endangered our baby's life. I kept hoping he'd show up at the hospital, that seeing his daughter would melt whatever ice had formed around his heart. But he never came. I named her Ava, took pictures, sent them to the few numbers I hadn't blocked yet. Nothing. Radio silence from the man who should have been celebrating the birth of his child. The paternity test took forever to process. 2 weeks of waiting, during which I kept telling myself that once the results proved Sean was Ava's father, he'd have to face what he'd done. He'd have to acknowledge that he'd abandoned his own flesh and blood over a stupid fight. When Travis called with the results, I was so confident. I was sitting in my living room, Ava sleeping in her bassinet, ready to hear the vindication I deserved. "Jessica," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. The test came back. 0% probability that Sean is the father. The phone slipped from my hand. 0%. That wasn't possible, except it was. The timeline I'd been denying, the nights with Nash, I'd convinced myself didn't matter, the lies I'd told myself about when I'd gotten pregnant. It all crashed down at once. Nash was Ava's father. The man I'd been casually seeing while living with Sean, the coworker I'd dismissed as unimportant, was actually the father of my child, and I'd spent months trying to force Sean to claim a baby that wasn't his. The worst part, Nash didn't even know. I'd never told him about the pregnancy, never mentioned that our casual hookups had consequences. When the court system tracked him down for child support, because I had to list him after Sean was cleared, he showed up at my door, angrier than I'd ever seen him. "You tried to pass off my kid as his," Nash demanded, standing in my doorway like an avenging angel. "For 6 months you let me think I was just some side piece while you played house with another man." I tried explaining, tried making him understand that I'd been confused, scared, dealing with an impossible situation. But Nash wasn't buying it. "I'm paying support because that's my legal obligation," he said. "But don't expect anything else from me. You made your choices." He established the most minimal custody arrangement possible. Supervised visits, only no overnight stays, no holidays. Treated me like I was some kind of danger to my own child. Meanwhile, Sean had moved on completely. I heard through the grapevine that he was seeing someone new, some woman from his gym, who probably thought she'd hit the jackpot with a man who'd learned from his past relationship mistakes. The irony made me sick. My family started pulling away too. Casey stopped returning my calls as much, and even my mother, Jeremy, seemed less convinced that I'd been wronged. When the full truth came out about the paternity situation, about Nash, about the timeline of everything, their support cooled considerably. Maybe you should focus on being a good mother to Ava, Casey suggested during one of our increasingly rare conversations. Instead of trying to rewrite what happened with Sean, but I wasn't rewriting anything. Sean had abandoned a pregnant woman based on assumptions and paranoia. The fact that his assumptions turned out to be correct didn't change how cruel his behavior had been. 2 years passed and my life looked nothing like what I'd planned. Nash paid his court-ordered support but treated me like a necessary evil. Ava was beautiful, smart, everything I dreamed of, but raising her alone while working and dealing with supervised visitation schedules was exhausting. Then I saw Sean's engagement announcement on social media. He was marrying some woman named Riley. Not a teacher, thank God, just some accountant he'd met through friends. The photos showed them hiking together, cooking together, looking disgustingly happy. She was pretty in that wholesome way that made me want to throw my phone across the room. I couldn't help myself. I reached out to Riley through Facebook just to give her a heads up about the kind of man she was marrying. Someone who'd abandon a pregnant woman, who'd put his own comfort above taking responsibility for a child. I just think you should know what Sean did to me. I wrote in a long message detailing everything, the abandonment, the legal battles, how he'd left me to raise Ava alone. Riley's response came back within hours. Sean told me all about your relationship and what happened. I'm sorry you're still struggling with the consequences of your choices, but please don't contact me again. Consequences of my choices. Like, I'd chosen to be abandoned while pregnant. Like I'd chosen to have Sean walk away instead of working through our problems. But it got worse. Riley had apparently screenshot my messages and shown them to Sean, who used them to strengthen his restraining order against me. Suddenly, I was the crazy ex who couldn't move on the unstable woman harassing his new relationship. The final blow came when Nash petitioned for full custody. He'd been documenting everything. My attempts to contact Sean, my emotional outbursts, during supervised visits, my inability to maintain stable housing, as I'd had to move twice due to rent increases. The custody hearing was a nightmare. Nash's lawyer painted me as an unstable woman who'd tried to commit paternity fraud, who'd harassed multiple men, who couldn't provide a stable environment for Ava. They had evidence of everything. The workplace incident, the legal battles with Sean, my messages to Riley. I tried explaining my side, tried making them understand that I'd been dealing with impossible circumstances, that any woman would have struggled in my situation, but the judge wasn't buying it. Ms. Jessica, she said, your pattern of behavior suggests an inability to take responsibility for your actions and a tendency toward manipulation and harassment. I'm awarding primary custody to Mr. Nash with supervised visitation for you pending completion of anger management and parenting classes. Just like that, I lost my daughter. The child I'd carried for 9 months, raised for 2 years, loved more than anything in the world. Taken away because everyone decided I was the problem. Nash was gentle when he picked up Ava's things, but firm about the boundaries. This is what's best for her, he said, not meeting my eyes. Maybe someday when you get the help you need. But we both knew there was no someday. I'd burned every bridge, alienated everyone who'd tried to help me, and convinced the world that I was exactly what Sean had always said I was. Unstable, manipulative, dangerous. Now I sit in my studio apartment working a job I hate to pay for supervised visits with my own daughter. Sean is married, happy, building the life he wanted with someone who apparently appreciates him. Nash has Ava most of the time, giving her the stability I couldn't provide. And me, I'm alone with the consequences of choices I'm still not sure I understand. Maybe I should have handled things differently with Sean. Maybe I should have been more careful with Nash. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut instead of lashing out when I felt cornered. But the truth is, I was pregnant and scared and dealing with a man who'd rather abandon his family than work through problems. The fact that it all worked out in his favor doesn't make what he did right. It just makes him lucky that his paranoid assumptions happen to match reality. I still think about that night with the vase sometimes. How different everything might have been if Sean had just listened instead of packing his bags. If he'd fought for us instead of running away at the first sign of conflict. But I guess some people aren't built for the messy reality of relationships. Some people would rather start fresh than deal with the complications of real life. And apparently the world rewards that kind of selfishness while punishing women who dare to fight back when they're cornered. The supervised visits with Ava are the hardest part. She barely knows me. Now calls Nash daddy and asks when she gets to go home. I'm a stranger in my own daughter's life, reduced to 2 hours twice a week under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just kept my mouth shut that night, if I'd swallowed Sean's accusations and paranoia without fighting back. Maybe we'd still be together. Maybe Ava would know her mother. But then I remember how it felt to be interrogated every time I walked through the door, to have my every move questioned and my friendships policed. Maybe this is better. Maybe being alone is better than being with someone who never trusted me anyway. At least now I know where I stand. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells. No more trying to be someone I'm not to keep a man happy. Just me, my tiny apartment, and the knowledge that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you how trapped you were all along.